Okay, welcome back, Amy. Thank you again. This is our session number three,
That's
and
right.
we are
Yeah.
going to be talking about what's with all the blessing and cursing in the primeval history.
An
So
important question.
yes, well, and I think as we were talking about it kind of over email, right? Like it's kind of sticky, right? Of
Hmm.
like maybe not sticky, but uncomfortable, right? Like this notion of cursing, especially is kind of, yeah, it's kind of uncomfortable.
Yeah,
But we certainly can't get around this kind of language, right, in the primeval history.
exactly.
And in fact, in the Bible in general,
Yeah.
we have this um, issue, and I think right, it's one of the things that we're going to talk about. One of the reasons why it's deeply uncomfortable is because, as we will quickly see, it's God who is doing these things,
Yeah.
right? It's like God is the one who's doing the blessing and the cursing, which is why it's even an issue, right? Of like like the question is, well, why does God bless some things
Mm,
and curse other things,
right.
right?
Yes.
It's
Exactly.
like what's the kind of internal logic or the method to the madness there.
Hmm.
So while I get my like share my screen and things like that, is there any like kind of introductory comments that you have about this kind of topic?
I'm especially intrigued this time to see the movement from the Old Testament to the New because it is so prominent in this primeval history, or at least it's a rubric by which some of the
Mm-hmm.
early ideas are organized, but it is not frequent in the New Testament. And yet, the places where it does appear, we need to pay close attention. So I think the
Yes.
dynamics between both halves of the canon are going to be really interesting. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yes. Yes. Well, and I would say the same thing about the Old Testament too, or the
Mm,
Hebrew Bible, is that the concept of cursing also is not frequent.
you're right,
But
right.
when it does occur, it occurs in some like really important places,
Mm,
most notably the blessing of Abraham
right,
in Genesis 12, right?
exactly.
This idea that whoever blesses Abraham and his descendants is going to be blessed, and whoever curses them is going to be cursed.
Right.
Um, Okay. So I thought, and yeah, I thought that kind of what makes the most sense in talking about this issue is like talking about blessing and cursing, like how is it used in the primeval history
Mhm.
itself? And then how do the New Testament authors, at least in the Christian context, how the New Testament authors seem to build on that? And then
Mhm.
what are some just kind of handful of um like just general advice for us
Mm,
today in
good.
given given the data that we see?
Yes.
Okay, so what I have done here is I've highlighted on our text um, the the verbs that are translated blessing and
Mhm.
cursing.
Mhm.
And so we have here in Genesis 1:22, this is where this is the fifth day. God has created the sea and the air creatures. And then God blesses them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the sea, yeah, fill the waters in the seas." And right here, oh, let me get my my red dot here, like the ha'uf, like the flying creatures multiply in the earth.
Mm.
And then day six, we get the land creatures, and the land creatures get no statement of blessing, none. But then once humanity gets on the scene, then we have almost the exact word for word same speech, right? God blessed them and said to them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, have dominion in the fish of the sea and in the flying creatures of the heavens and in all the chaya, like the wild animals or animals that creep on the land." So we have two specific statements of blessing, and then in chapter three we get two specific statements of cursing. Sorry. Uh, we have the seventh day. We get this additional statement that God blessed the seventh day and this verb right here, kadesh, meaning to set it apart or to make it holy. Um, and then chapter 3, we get two statements of cursing. Um, it's verse 11. Wait, I had these highlighted. No, oh, it's 14. Sorry. I hadn't gone far enough. Okay. Verse 14, where God speaks to the serpent, saying, because you've done this, cursed are you. And if I read the Hebrew very literally, from all the behemah, which is like it's a generic word for cattle. Usually, like when you think of behemah, we think of like domesticated cattle, but it's large animals. And from all the, this is the same word as before, hayat, like the wild animals of the field. And then, of course, so this is God's speech to the serpent after the fall, and then God's speech specifically to Adam. Cursed is the ground, literally, like for the sake of you.
Mhm.
Although there's this extra preposition in there, but compound prepositions are pretty common in Hebrew. Um, so we have this specific statement of cursing of the ground, and then probably what's the most problematic is now in chapter 4, after Cain has murdered Abel. Um, God says to Cain, specifically Cain, you are cursed from the ground,
Mhm.
which has opened up its mouth to take the blood of your brother from your hand. Um, so I think that the like the kind of the first observation that I would make of these things is that it seems to like the concept of the ground seems
Mhm.
to be distinguishing, right?
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
so um the let me go back. So in so of course like we get this statement specifically that the ground itself is cursed
Mhm.
right here in 3:17. Um in God's speech to the serpent, the result of being cursed is being brought down right to the ground, right? That's the kind of the specific punishment is that he's going to eat dust, right?
Mhm.
This word afar here, dust he's going to eat um, all the days of your life. What right? Which is opposed to the sea and the air creatures, which are distinct from the land creatures.
Mhm.
Um, Yeah, which is kind of puts humanity in this weird kind of place, right? Because humanity is like created with the land creatures, but is specifically blessed
Yeah.
as opposed to as opposed to cursed. So let me just pause there and say what are some of your thoughts or any like reflections on just that, like, right, just overall big picture observations about what seems to distinguish between these two categories.
So it immediately makes me want to ask a question about the ancient Near Eastern mindset that there seems to be some kind of affirmation or celebration or good about those things that are above in the air, right? They're blessed. Although I guess that
Yes,
doesn't apply to the sea but that's
right.
something kind of other and different.
Yes.
And then, as you've stated, the curse is associated with the ground or the serpent who is made to be on the ground. So, my first question would be in their cosmology, in their kind of imagination of how the universe is structured, is there an affirmation of things that are like high and kind of a demotion of things that are down low, or is that too simplistic?
No, I don't think so. As in, well, I say no, but in a qualified sense, right?
Mm,
In that it seems very clear to me that in ancient Near Eastern cosmology, not just ancient Israel, but
hmm
other ancient Near Eastern cultures too, right? The heavenly realm is the divine realm. It's where um, gods are.
Hmm.
But I've never gotten the sense that like there's something special about
Mm.
being high up other
Okay.
than it's where the powerful people are that you're
Got it.
trying to
Got it.
appease.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But it's what's interesting is that you have the sea creatures being blessed because that is not what I would expect. Because like
Right.
right, it's like in the ancient Near East, like the ocean is danger, right?
That's
It's
right.
like
That's right.
um yeah, so it's yeah, it's just really fascinating. Well, and this is just a thought I just had just now, is that I guess that in some ways that kind of makes sense, right? If this author is invested in this idea, which seems clear from Genesis, the creation narrative of Genesis 1, invested in this idea that everything God has made is good,
Hmm.
it kind of would make sense, right? If there's cultural pressure to think of like maybe the sea creatures are inherently dangerous or
Mm.
somehow
Hmm.
like cause more of a threat, then right, this would tend to be a polemic kind of against that,
Yeah.
right? Of
Oh,
like,
that's
no,
helpful.
there's nothing intrinsically bad about being in the
Mm.
ocean.
Yeah.
The thing is that right, it's like that logic, it seems like that logic would apply to the ground animals too, but the ground animals aren't blessed, right?
No. But then that actually leads me to a second question. I wonder
Yeah.
if the function of that absence of blessing is then to highlight humanity, as you've already stated.
Yes.
So it's not a negative critique against land animals per
Right.
se, but it's a way to make humanity's distinctiveness shine.
Yes. Yes. I would agree with that. Absolutely. And I think that there does seem to be a method to the madness here in the primeval history, in
Mhm.
that like this idea of blessing and cursing, they seem to be discrete sets, right?
Mm,
As
mm,
in as in it seems like the author is being very intentional not to conflate these things, right?
mhm.
It's like um right, so like or what I was thinking of is right, it's like we have an instance of right the serpent who becomes a ground, or maybe as a ground creature. We don't know exactly what the serpent would have been
Right.
like before, but it certainly seems like after this curse is enacted, like the reader is meant to be thinking of the serpent
Yes.
as like a snake, right?
Right.
Which is of course, ground ridden.
Yes.
Um, so oh, you're right. So all I'm saying is it seems like the author is it seems being careful in some sense to say that what is blessed by God isn't cursed and what is cursed by God isn't blessed.
Mm, yes.
With
Yeah. To draw
with
those
the
lines.
exception
Yeah.
of right, that Cain is gonna we have to
Mhm.
deal with Cain in a moment, right?
Right.
That
Right.
Cain seems to be an exception.
Yeah.
But I think the big takeaway that I have here is that the fundamental thing that is different after the fall pertains to the ground, right?
Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
somehow the actual, right, like the actual, according to the conceptualization of the story, the actual land, like the ground, it's different now.
Yes. Yes.
Um, Most notably, it produces thorns and
Yeah.
thistles now, right? It produces the things that not only we can't eat, but get in the way of us getting things that we can eat.
Right.
Because
Right.
all the vegetation up to that point, is things that we can eat. Either land animals can eat or humans.
Yeah. Yes. And so they're choked out by this curse.
Right.
And that Adam's sin kind of radiates out. I mean, it's a very tangible way to think about the impact of human sin upon creation, right? As it spreads to the ground, into the vegetation, then into the
Yes.
animals. And then
Yes.
that's like the epicenter. And then the ground becomes the transport through which this curse passes.
Right.
Yeah, it's a sobering picture for sure.
Yes. At the same time, what's really wonderful about this, I think, is that even after the fall, right, humanity themselves still retain their blessing.
That's
Do you
right.
see what I'm saying? Right?
Yeah,
It's like God doesn't say to the man and the woman, "You guys are cursed
exactly.
now." What he
No,
says is, "It's the ground that's cursed,"
that's right.
which allows room for humanity to, right, to, yeah, to retain their blessing.
And I think that's important to underline because I'm sure you've read it before, you've heard people say it. It's very easy to kind of stumble into the language of saying Adam and Eve are cursed.
Yes,
And careful reading of the Hebrew of the scriptures reveal that that's actually not the case. And that is an
right.
important detail to pay attention to.
Yes, yes. Yeah, and so when we get to the New Testament, along that vein, I want to ask you about Galatians 3 because
Right.
Galatians 3
Exactly.
has a statement about that. So
Yeah,
I'm curious to hear how you deal with that. Um, so which brings us to Cain, right? The problem of Cain. So
exactly. Yeah.
um and I think let me get to the actual verse here. Um oh no, actually before I talk about Cain, let me say one more observation that I think I've made here is that the two statements of blessing of creatures have come in the context of some kind of divine mandate or command.
Right. Right. Hmm.
And so which I think is interesting. I mean, like the one exception is the Sabbath day, right? There's God doesn't give a command on the Sabbath day that accompanies the blessing of the Sabbath day. Um but just kind of this general idea that when God tells you what to do, like that's a beneficent action of God, right?
That's
That's like
yeah.
God doing something good for you,
Mhm.
which the implication is then if you obey that command that God has given you, that also is a beneficent thing for you, right? Like, um, oh, sorry, I want to make sure I get this before we leave it because I wanted to ask you about this. Because that word bless is eulogeo.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, no, come on, right here. So yeah, oops, I didn't highlight this one. This eulogeo, which literally means like good word, right?
Hmm. That's correct. Hmm.
So, so I guess I was going to ask you about like what is this like what is a good word then?
Yeah, it does seem, I think it's quite closely tied with the theme of God's speech here, right? God
Yes,
spoke
yes,
creation into existence. God is proclaiming. I mean, this is really a strong assertion throughout the scriptures that God is a communicative God. And so it's not surprising then that God's blessing is enacted through the vehicle of speech, that God spoke these things as good and pronounced a blessing upon them. So that immediately strikes me. Do you think there's more going on with that?
Oh, I would no, I don't necessarily know. That's why I wanted to ask you. Like, all I was the only as you were answering the question that came to my mind is is this sense of eulogeo, is it only speaking good, or is it
Oh,
actually, or
oh,
is
I
it
see.
doing good also?
Yes,
Do you
yes,
see what I'm
I
saying?
see. That's an excellent question. Yes, it is. So it at base, you're right. The etymology had language, and we see God's speech here. But I mean, that's actually the powerful thing about God's speech is that it is a speech act, right? God
Yes,
enacts things
yes,
by God's powerful word. So too in the New Testament, blessing is enacting. So it isn't just words, but it's words that perform, words that bring
got
about
it.
change
Yep,
in a good
yep,
way. Yeah,
yeah.
that's important.
That makes intuitive sense to me. Yep,
Mm,
that makes intuitive sense to me. That particularly when we're talking about God, to to speak to speak good
right,
is to do good, right? There's
precisely.
those two things come together. Okay, good. Thank you for indulging me in that.
Yeah. That's good.
Um, okay, so yeah, so in the issue with Cain, and I think this is really important. I think Cain is no, let me back up. I think when we're talking about Cain, we need to realize that from the perspective of this writer, the Cain story is part and parcel of the fall narrative, right?
Mm,
That
mm,
the
right.
Toledot runs from the beginning of Genesis 2 all the way to the end of Genesis 4.
Mhm. Yeah.
So these are one story. It's not, we don't have Genesis 2 as one story and Genesis 3 and then Genesis 4. It's
Mm,
all the same story. And um so God makes his pronouncement for Cain,
mm.
right, as like a, it's like a retribution for Cain's act of murder.
Yes.
And so, like for me, as I read this, I think this is significant of that. I think what this indicates to us in this narrative that there's something uniquely horrific or um there's something uniquely bad, I guess, about murdering another person, right?
Right.
Like the fact that this action now, right, like it in some ways seems to affect Cain's status,
Yes.
right? And that the fundamental difference now is is his relationship with the ground, right? His
Mhm.
relationship with the ground is different
Yeah.
now, right?
That's right.
It's like God saying if you go around killing people, the ground, like you're going to try to grow food, but the ground's not going to produce as much food for you.
Yes.
Do you see what you see what I'm saying there?
Yeah.
Um,
So is
which
this a
oh, go ahead.
So is this an intensification then? I just want to go back to the curse pronounced on the ground, as you said a moment ago. For Adam and Eve, there will be thorns and thistles. They can still get fruit, but it'll just be harder. Is this an intensification? Verse 12, I'm looking at the translations here.
Yes,
It will not
exactly.
yield, and you
Right,
will have to wander. Okay.
right. In other words, it's I read I read God's speech here as saying that like the retribution for this action that he has done now of taking another man's life will be that it will be even harder to get food from the ground now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I mean if you want to, right, it's like uh, it's the word I want to use is like magic, right? It's like there's something magic now, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Like the ground is even more an enemy, right?
Yeah.
And it's something intrinsic. Um yeah, which I think I mean I think like kind of like the fundamental, I think this fits of a piece with the primeval history in general that
Mm-hmm.
seems to be the fundamental, like the fundamental human flaw is one of violence, right? Like that's the thing that finally promotes or provokes God to bring the flood, right? It's like
Yes.
um and so we have this like we have these concepts of violence and the image of God that loom large, right?
Right.
Like the why is Cain killing Abel so horrific? Well, it's horrific because Abel is his human brother who is also created in the image of God, and that
Right.
there's 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 something, right. It's not the same as killing an animal, or
No.
you see where I'm going with that? Like
Yeah.
how this the it fits with the entire narrative that seems to be um in the primeval history, and that after the flood, right, God then changes things to to curb this violent tendency.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm just looking at my on my notes here. I think those are the main things that I wanted to make sure to cover. Any other comments before we move
No.
on to the New Testament?
No, I don't think so. That it's just so clear that death, the taking of a life, is that which yields the greatest curse.
Yes.
Yeah.
These notions of, specifically this notion of cursing, I think, which is what makes seems to be uncomfortable, is that I think what the primeval history seems to be suggesting to us is that this notion of God cursing is tied in some way to justice, right?
Yeah.
Like whether
Mhm.
you understand that concept of justice as punitive or non-punitive, um, it's connected to like some sort of how do humans relate to each other in a just way, and
Yes. Right.
how do humans relate to God in a just way. Okay.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay, so let's go to the New Testament now. Where should we go first?
You mentioned Galatians, and I mean that particular word that appears in the translations, this epikataratos, that only appears in Galatians 3.
Oh, interesting.
So there are
Epikatata,
other
which
like
is the
there
same. That's the same as back in Genesis,
it looked like it was, if I was
I
looking
think.
correctly.
I'm sure you were. The, I was because there are a few different Greek words that are, yeah,
Yeah.
epikataratos. Yeah,
Hmm.
nice.
And I mean, if you'll
Um,
note, right, for Galatians, the places where it does appear, 3:10 and 3:13, are citations from Israel's scripture, not Genesis, but from Deuteronomy.
so I hadn't highlighted. Let me do this for um right. It's the start of the. Oh yes, yes, it's the quote in Deuteronomy. Yep.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so if the primeval history seems to be making this distinction between that humanity, even after the fall, is still blessed.
Hmm.
Um, so what, yeah, like how do we make sense of this? So we get this quote later in even Torah where if you don't do the law, you're cursed. Well, yeah,
Yeah,
what are
I
your
mean,
thoughts about that?
maybe we need to take a side or like there's a middle point here in Deuteronomy itself. So maybe we would need to go to Deuteronomy 27
We can do that
because
easily.
this is another key place in the scriptures where you have this concept of curses coming.
Yes.
And you get a long list there, right? Starting in 27:15.
Of blessings and curses.
Exactly, exactly. So I maybe you can reflect for just a moment before we go to Paul, as an Old Testament scholar, how is the relationship between Deuteronomy and the primeval history? How is that discussed? Maybe that's an important point to establish first. Or is there a
So,
conversation that
well,
happens there?
yeah, I mean, in 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 scholastic, right, in scholastic literature about the Torah, it's what's the word? I'm struggling to think of a right way to like you get a lot of different opinions. I'll say
Of
that,
course,
right?
that
Like
makes sense,
there's
right?
nothing that's normative because there are so many different ideas about the composition of Torah,
Of course,
right?
right,
Everywhere from Moses wrote all of it except for maybe the last chapter to there's any number of authors that are compiling over a number of years, or even right there, like there are some who say like all of Torah is after the exile, right? You know what I mean?
right, right.
Like it's so different
Mm,
that I don't think that you can. There's not like any monolithic
mm,
type of reference. I think for me, what I would say is that it seems to me that in the book of Deuteronomy, this notion of blessing and cursing seems to be tied in the local context. It seems to be tied to the idea specifically in relation to the law itself. right?
Right.
Like that
Exactly.
God is giving these cultural norms for his people, and that there are, in the similar way, right? That like not exactly the same, but similar, that if you do them, um you're going to have, there's going to be a good result. And if
Yes.
you don't do them, there's going to be some kind of retribution or, right, some kind of consequence to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Which, I mean, I'm
yeah,
thinking canonically here, and I recognize it's so important to note that scholarship has a wide range of thinking about these things on a
yes,
very complicated and important level. If I step back and take kind of a big picture, that pronouncement of if you do what God says, you're going to experience blessing. If you don't do what God says, you're going
right.
to experience the consequence of a curse is exactly really what happened with Adam and Eve, right?
In the primeval
Obedience
history. Yes,
or
exactly.
disobedience.
Yes, yes,
And I'm especially struck here by the citation that Paul has, at least in Galatians 3:10, is really summative. This is from Deuteronomy 27:26. It's kind of like a catch-all, right? Cursed is
yes,
anyone who does not uphold the words of this law by observing them. All of the ones
yes,
that are previous are quite specific, right?
yes,
Bribes, and often these are about murder or
yes,
destruction of relationships, as we just saw with
yes,
Cain,
yes,
um, destruction of a correct relationship, even between humans and creation. But all of that specificity is then summarized in 27:26. Cursed is anyone who doesn't do any of the law,
yep, right,
which is so comprehensive. And then that's exactly how Paul cites it then. If we go to Galatians 3, that
yes,
uh, go back to my notes here, right? That cursed is everyone who does not observe and obey all the things. For those who rely on the works of the law are under a curse. And so Paul seems to be moving along the lines of saying, actually, that curse it comes to everyone because no one
right,
can keep all of the words of the law. And so a curse is upon all. Now, that is quite a radical statement for a Jewish person
right,
to make. And as a New Testament
yes,
scholar, I immediately want to say this is to an active conversation that Paul would be well aware that there's an entire system of atonement. And so when you don't live up to
yes,
the law, you go doing the sacrifices. But he
yes,
has, my interpretation of Paul is that he's had a radical shift in his understanding of the effectiveness of the law, such that he's able to conclude, yes, it's holy and righteous and good, but that humans are cursed by it because of the power of sin and their failure to be obedient. And that is really just
yes.
landing here in Galatians 3:10.
So this is really, really good. So I think what you just said a minute ago is a key here, that Paul Paul gives us the context to understand his statement here. And specifically, he's not referencing the primal history narrative, he's referencing the specific use, right, by quoting from Deuteronomy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that, right, the difference, um yeah, this is like just was clarified for me now in this conversation, right? The fundamental difference is that I think that in Deuteronomy, this is not, right. Whether you're blessed or cursed is not a statement about your intrinsic value or
Mm,
your personal identity, right?
mm,
Like the
important.
not like
Yeah.
it appears to be in the primeval history, right?
Oh, that's
Like
fascinating.
where
Yeah.
these these speeches of God are not in, right. At least the speeches of blessing are not in response to any action.
Mm,
The curses are in response to some kind of, right, some kind of disobedience.
mhm.
Whereas in Deuteronomy, these statements are, both blessing and cursing are about whether you are doing what God has told you to do.
Yes, yes. That's
And
really
so
powerful.
I think that's how we can, I think that's how we can like logically reconcile these statements, right? It's like um right, it's like, as people, right, we're blessed by God, yes.
Yes, yes.
But if we do what God tells us to do, things are going to be better, generally better than if we don't do what God tells us to do.
Right,
You
right.
see what I'm saying? Like,
Totally. But doesn't that, I just want to make sure I'm hearing you well, because this feels like an important point. is that not what happens to Adam and Eve? They still have the blessing, right? But the ground is cursed because of their actions. And then, but are we saying that Cain is an exception to that? Well, can we go back to that? Is he
Yep,
himself
absolutely.
cursed, or is it the ground that becomes even more cursed?
I'm glad you no no it's he himself,
Okay,
but we can read the statement in at least two different ways.
got it.
Yes, let me go because this is important. Uh, and um, here it is. So this here right, cursed. This is a passive participle, right? So
Okay.
like it's been done. Cursed are
Mm-hmm.
you from the ground, and it's this little word, this
Yeah.
min
Then.
from, which can be which is used to denote separation.
Mm,
So, but it can be used in
I
either
see.
a comparative sense or a spatial sense, as
Okay.
well as several other senses. Right? In other words, we this could be God saying, "You are cursed more than the ground is cursed." In other
Mm,
words, like the level of Cade's curse is now even like overtaken
got it.
from the ground. Um, but I don't think that that's the best sense. As in,
Okay.
if you'll notice here, both KJV, NIV, and NRSV don't say that. They use the spatial sense, like not
Got it.
over, they say
Yeah.
from, right? From
Yeah.
the ground. In other words, that there's there's a there's a gap. Does that like
Hmm.
cursed from the
I
ground? So
see. I see.
like
Yeah.
the nature of
Towards
this
the
curse is to cause a further separation
yeah.
between in the relationship between Cain and the ground, which
Okay.
I th-
Okay.
which I think the rest of the speech would tend to affirm that.
Mm,
The thing that's a little crazy about this is that if we go back to the speech to the serpent,
yeah.
it's like the same thing. Cursed are
Got
you
it.
from all the other animals, where it seems to
Yes.
be like
I see.
it's in the comparative, right? It's like God is saying you are cursed above everything else.
Mm. So, Joel, what were you saying about identity then in Deuteronomy 27? And maybe you want to go to the Hebrew of Deuteronomy 27:26.
Oh, what I was meaning is that the specific context of this verbal pair, blessing
Mm.
and cursing
Yes.
in Deuteronomy, seems like the author seems to be explicitly tying these two concepts in that context to whether you follow the law or whether you don't.
Yes. Okay.
And I was contrasting that to in Genesis 1, like God just blesses humanity and
Yeah.
blesses the sea and air creatures, and it's
Right.
not contingent on any action.
Oh, that's
Th-
really
that's what I that's what I was saying, is
right.
that
Right.
there seems to be there seems to be a difference between
Yeah.
those two places in Torah in
Mm,
terms of how the specific concepts are being used,
right.
but there's a similarity in that, particularly in the notion of cursing, that
Mm,
cursing is something that happens to you when you don't do what God wants you to do,
yeah.
which
Yeah.
I think is what you were reflecting on, right? Of like, but
Right.
this seems very similar to what happens with Adam and Eve.
Exactly. Exactly. And maybe so too with Cain. Like, yes, he is cursed. He is separated from the ground, but God puts a mark on him. There's some kind of protection. And so that
Yes.
unconditional blessing,
Right.
maybe another way of saying that is being a bearer of the image of God. Even when he takes the life of another
Yes.
image bearer, he doesn't
Yes.
lose that unconditional blessing,
Exactly.
which we could apply as well to Deuteronomy. You are human, and so
Yes.
you are blessed,
Yes.
and yet you receive God's favor if you're obedient. You receive God's consequences if you are disobedient, but you don't
Yes.
ever, it's an inalterable, your blessing that you receive by being an image bearer.
Right.
Hmm.
Yes. Yes.
So maybe that does prepare us then to go back to Paul, having spent a little time in Deuteronomy, and notice again the only two places where this specific term, epikataritas, is used is in these citations from Deuteronomy in Galatians 3:10 and 3:13. So first, those who rely on the works of the law, cursed is everyone, the summative statement. And so there
Yes.
everyone is under the curse. He has then his citation from Habakkuk in the middle, but I think we could connect to 3:13 that then Christ
Yes.
bears this curse. And here he goes to what seems almost an obscure reference a little bit earlier in Deuteronomy 21:23. And if we were to
Yes.
go there in the law, um, that is like a very specific instance. Here, I'll read from
Oh,
the NRSV, or maybe you have it there pulled up.
Deuteronomy 21. What?
23,
Oh,
exactly.
23. What is the verse?
That is his the per well, I'm going to go up one. When someone is convicted of a crime and punishable by death and is executed, and you hang him on a tree, his corpse must not remain all night upon the tree. You shall bury him that same day, for anyone hung on a tree is under God's curse.
What's the verse number?
Oh, sorry, 21:23.
Oh, chapter 21, verse 23. Got
That's
it.
correct.
Oh, there we go. Yes. Yeah, that's so interesting.
So if the previous citation from Deuteronomy was this summative statement, everything in the law
Hmm.
included, this one is quite particular, right? This
Yes.
instance of a criminal being executed, and then you have the curse. So take us here to the Hebrew, Joel. Is this the same term that we've been looking at?
It is not.
Oh, now that's
So
interesting.
yeah, which is really interesting. So this, yes, so this is this root is kof lamed lamed.
Hmm.
So which is a little different than aleph resh resh. So aleph resh resh, like it's like curse. That's what it means. It means to curse.
Uh-huh.
Whereas the more I guess I will say concrete meaning of this word of kalal is to lighten, right? Or
Mm.
to slight, right? And then it's
Ah,
like it
interesting.
acquires the metaphorical meaning of cursing.
Mm.
Does that make sense? Like kind of the fundamental difference between these two
Yeah.
terms?
Yeah.
Um, in practical speech, what I would say is that this isn't quite like it's a softer term, is what I
Got
would
it.
say.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And this word is kof lamed lamed. It is used in the primeval history, but only once, and I think it's in chapter 8. Um, but it's yeah, it's not the same consistent verb that's used in all those direct statements of
Mm.
cursing that we have looked at.
Got it.
Um, but and is this is this is feminine singular construct. So this is a noun. Yeah. So this is yeah, a noun like um
Mm.
it's a passive participle, so hanged. Oh, a curse of God. For a curse of God is someone who's hanged,
Yeah.
literally. That's kind of yeah. Okay.
And interestingly, in the Septuagint, so it is the same basic form. I don't know if you can pull up the Septuagint of Deuteronomy. Um,
Mm.
might take a minute.
Oh, it will take a minute because I have this one
You have
is
that
only
locked
the
in.
Göttingen of Genesis. Hang on. Let me get to Deuteronomy here. Oh, I gotta get rid of this.
Maybe as you pull it up
Yep,
visually,
go
I
for
can
it.
say that it's the same basic verb form. It is kataraomai, but it just doesn't have the preposition epi upon it that we saw in the
Got
Genesis narrative.
it.
And it's in the perfect participle form here. K kater ramenos.
Oh, right there. Thank you.
Exactly.
I was like searching, searching, searching.
So that's
Uh,
interesting that the
yeah.
Septuagint has used the
And
basic same verbal form to translate a different Hebrew term. And of course, we likely have a different translator in Deuteronomy than you do in Genesis, or that's probable.
yes, yes.
What is
Yeah,
it?
I wouldn't, what's the word? I would not make a lot of hay about the fact that this is a different route.
Got
Like
it. Okay, that's
in
helpful.
my mind, like I think, I mean, yes, it might not be as strong, but I think the fundamental idea is still there. We're
Got
still
it. Okay.
right. We're still talking about this. That's how I read this construct chain here. Curse of God. This is
Okay.
still like, right. It's like God has done something.
I see. That's
Do
helpful. Yeah,
you see what I'm saying?
I do. I do.
Like,
So don't make too much of that. So it's not surprising then that we'd have the same Greek term.
no, right. No, not at all. Because, and I think that's, at least in my experience so far, it seems to me that Greek translators in the Septuagint are they they seem to be governed more by concept or idea than specifically trying to make a one-to-one word
Right.
match.
Of course. That's well said. That's an important principle to notice. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. So going back to Galatians now,
exactly.
um,
But
I don't want to interrupt your flow. Did you have more that you were
well,
going to say here?
I just think it's quite interesting as we go back to Galatians that while the Septuagint version then we have is or that's preserved here is slightly different than what Paul himself is quoting. So, I mean, again,
Oh,
don't want to
yes, yes,
make
yes.
too much of that. It could very well be
Yes.
that Paul had a copy of Deuteronomy in front of him that has epi, kataratas, or it could be
Right.
that he wants to specifically align this citation in Deuteronomy 21:23 to the citation in Deuteronomy 27:26, and
Right.
therefore makes the verbal form exact when it's in the ballpark in the Septuagint.
Yep. Yep.
I'm not at all close to that idea because he's
Right.
weaving together an argument that he's established. Curses come to those who are disobedient in any format with regard to the law, and that's going to be everyone at some point.
Yes.
And then he's able to establish that the particular thing that happens to someone who dies on a tree is to bear a curse. And
Yes.
what a fascinating example of a post cross and resurrection reading of Israel's scriptures,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Because I'm not an expert on this text. I would want to consult experts by going to monographs or commentaries or articles.
Yes.
But I would wager that you don't have Jewish examples previous to Paul who read Deuteronomy 21:23 hanging on a tree and cursed in a salvific or messianic or kind of
Yes.
future king of Israel kind of way.
Right.
This is not a
Yep.
verse that you're reading through and you're like, oh, that's clearly about the Messiah, right?
Right.
It's just, no,
Right.
it's about a traitor. It's about a criminal who dies and the curse. And you know what jumped out to me as well, Joel, in that citation from Deuteronomy 21:23, it's that the reason they have to take the body down, and Paul doesn't end up citing this, But the reason they have to take the body down is that that body will defile the ground, the land.
Yes.
And so another connection to ground and curse that is quite interesting.
Yes.
But
That
Paul
of
doesn't
course
like
we
that.
of course that we see reenacted when Jesus dies on the cross, right? That like
Exactly.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really fascinating. Oh, it's so fascinating.
But I think
Yeah,
Paul
well,
wants to be able to say, because I know who Jesus is and what happened to him, then I'm reading through Deuteronomy and oh my goodness, right? The
yes.
very curse that all humanity bears by failing to fulfill the law in full is the curse that Christ himself bore on the cross. It may
Yes.
seem obvious to us now because we've lived as influenced by Paul for 2,000 years, but it's ingenious exegesis, I think. I find it really creative and fascinating. And I
Yes.
believe it's led by the Holy Spirit, that these
Yes.
texts are the treasures of these texts have laid uncovered until Christians know how to read them in this particular way.
Yes. Well, and as you've been discussing this passage, what has kind of come across very clearly to me is this notion of um that like clearly Paul's view of atonement is substitutionary, right? And like and
Mhm.
that right that's like we've sinned and right we as people have sinned and offended God, and so we have some sort of just retribution for that, which Jesus did for us, right? Like, do you see what I'm saying? Like, that's what my big takeaway
Absolutely.
from this notion of cursing, right? It's like,
Yeah.
which completely, completely fits with what all the evidence we have seen so far, right?
Yeah.
That this notion, how should we understand this notion of God cursing?
Mhm.
It's, it's, we should understand this notion of God cursing in as retribution for some way that people have offended, right?
Mhm.
It's not again not an intrinsic. It's not a statement of intrinsic dignity or intrinsic honor.
Right.
Um, and
Yeah.
that what Jesus does on the cross is to bear that, right?
Yeah.
Like yeah, becoming a curse.
It
Yeah.
strikes me as well how powerful the imagery is. And maybe this is latent in some of Paul's work with First Adam, Second Adam, Romans 5, First
Mm-hmm.
Corinthians 15.
Yes.
But as we discussed a moment ago, Adam's and Eve's disobedience, but it really is, the curse is pronounced to Adam. And I understand, I think that's the case because Adam is the first human creation. But because of Adam's sin, as we said, that kind of radiates into the ground, right? And then this
Yes.
curse is spread. So too with Christ on the cross, who bears the curse, and then the kind of redemptive creational theology is that Christ's sacrifice, yes, stands in the place of what is deserved for humanity, but then radiates into the ground, and all of creation will eventually be redeemed.
Yes.
So there's a very
Yes.
strong second Adam kind of picture here that I would
Yes.
wager Paul has a very tangible sense that, like, as Christ is hanging on the cross, the bearing of that curse is radiating throughout all of creation.
Yes. Yes. Well, and that makes so much I was gonna say it makes so much sense. To that's not quite exactly what I mean to say, but I'm not sure exactly what it means or what I'm trying to say. Other than right, it's interesting to me this notion about connection of redemption and salvation with the ground, right? And
Mm,
that what Paul says right in First Corinthians 15, right? Of like the fruit of salvation is that we will all, right, the ground will like yield us
that's
back up
right.
again,
That's right.
right?
Yes.
Like
Yes.
um because that's our right. Well, again, which ties back to primeval history, because that's our punishment, right? Our punishment is that we will die and become, right?
Done.
We'll decompose into the
Right.
ground.
Right. These
Yeah.
feel like the threads of biblical theology, right?
Yes.
Noticing these themes and dynamics across different parts of scripture. And because we believe in a divine author, you can pick up those themes and quite fruitfully as a play
Yes.
on words, uh, see how they connect. I'm blessed by these connections being made more clear as we study the primeval history and then connect it to the cross. That's powerful.